What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Now, some of you may have remembered at the very start of my channel, around about 6 months ago, that I put out a video outlining my mission statement and what I want to cover on this channel. I said that I wanted to cover horology, fashion and literature. Now, so far I've only made videos covering horology, so I've kind of failed on the literature front, which is why I'm starting a new series, which is the Humble Horology Book Club. Now, every month I'll be reading at least one book, and I'll be bringing you my thoughts and review at the end of the month. Now, to kick us off, we are going to have a quick look at the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Now, this book was published 23 years ago, which makes it older than myself, so I think it's really interesting for us to have a quick look today at the lessons that this book teaches us and whether they're actually still relevant in a society 23 years after this book was published, because a lot has changed since then, obviously, and a lot's changed in this year alone. What's interesting though is this is a 20th year anniversary, so Robert Kiyosaki, who is the author, has gone back in quite a few places in this book and actually reflected on some of the advice he's given and how things have either changed since he gave that advice and how things that he advised on are still relevant. And there's actually some very interesting examples of where he was made fun of by financial experts when this book first came out and when he was trying to get it published, and how some of the events like the 2008 housing crisis actually proved some of his points. So it's quite an interesting thing to have a look into. Okay, so if you know nothing about this book, what Robert Kiyosaki has written is a book which claims that it will teach you the differences between how the rich teach their children than the middle class and the poor do. And it does do that. It teaches you the differences in terms of how they look and how they manage their money. How they do this is that they teach you the difference between an asset and a liability, and they also teach you some very interesting things about how the rich appropriate their wealth versus the middle class and poor. The main example being that you go to a rich person's house and they'll have a old battered car on the drive, whereas you go through a middle class neighbourhood and it will be full of brand new cars. The difference being that the rich know that wealth is wasted on an asset. Well, that's the whole point, is that a car is not an asset, it's a liability. So instead of spending money on liabilities like a car, which are going to depreciate in value, the rich will invest in assets. Now, before I go too far into that, I'll take you through the structure of the book and how Robert lays this out to make his points. Now, the way that Robert spreads his message is through 6 lessons, and I apologise if you see me looking down, it's because I've got my notes down here with some of the bits that I need to touch on. So the 6 lessons are: the rich don't work for money, why it's important to teach financial literacy, mind your own business, taxes and the power of corporations, the rich invent money, and work to learn. Now, the 6 lessons define the book, but the book's also split into 2 halves. The first half are sort of anecdotes of Robert growing up and how he had these 2 influences in his life. He had his biological father, who he refers to as the poor dad, who was very highly educated, worked in the government system, was very, very highly educated, but had a attitude where he would never beat the man. And even though he had done all the things that you would think that would have made him wealthy, he wasn't able to actually influence his wealth and grow it beyond being paycheck to paycheck. And then on the flip side, he had his rich dad, who was his friend's biological father and almost became an adoptive father figure to Robert. And that he wasn't traditionally as qualified as Robert's poor dad, in the fact that he dropped out of school. However, his relationship with money was where he was able to really build his wealth. He was able to have the self-discipline not to spend money on liabilities and to invest in assets and create several businesses that made him a lot of money. So I've touched on a really important point, which is the difference between the 2 father figures was their relationship with money. So the poor dad worked for his money, and he worked just to get a paycheck, which is why he was stuck in the cycle of living paycheck to paycheck and being stuck in what Robert refers to as the rat race, which is what the American household generally finds itself stuck in. And on the other side of things was the rich dad, who worked to learn and worked for life experiences And the way that he sells this is that when you work to learn, you will always be able to pick up new knowledge and create new sources of income. And when you work to learn, you can easily apply this to make more money in the future. Whereas when you just work for a paycheck, you're stuck in a cycle and you're never going to be able to grow your skills and your assets beyond just being caught in that paycheck to paycheck mindset. And that brings us to the second lesson, which is why you should teach financial literacy. And that's because 23 years ago, Robert said that the school system failed his generation in terms of teaching them financial literacy, and I can tell you in 2020 that is still the case. The fact that the average person does not know how to manage money, and they don't know the difference between investing their money to create wealth, long-term wealth, and spending it on unnecessary goods just for that buzz of buying it. And that's why stuff like this is so important even today, is because we're still not at the point where financial literacy is taught well enough in homes or schools. So that's why it's so important to spread this message. The third lesson, which I think is one of the most important, is mind your own business. Essentially, don't worry about what other people are doing, because you've got a lot of variable factors in life, and the only ones that you can affect is what you do on a daily basis. When you wake up, how are you going to approach the day to take as many lessons from it as possible? And also, by minding your own business, you can fully commit yourself to building your own wealth and knowledge base to be able to expand your income and thus expand your ability to create wealth. Now, the fourth lesson was around taxes and the power of corporations. Now, I feel this is where this book starts to show its age slightly. Now, as I said, this book is 23 years old, and I think some of the things in this book, which Robert talked about, wouldn't fly today. So particularly in terms of taxes, there's a lot of advice about tax write-offs for different personal goods, which I genuinely don't think you get away with today, because it's a lot tighter than it used to be. So I think this chapter is important in terms of the way that you should funnel your wealth, particularly if you're an entrepreneur and business owner. However, I would take it with a grain of salt, and I'll do your own research before you take this as gospel and set up your taxes in a way which might not be compliant with today's regulations. Now, the fifth point was the fact that the rich invent money, and they don't just have one income source. Now, you can become extremely wealthy off one income source. However, you're unlikely to build long-term wealth with just that one tool, and particularly if you get to the point of retirement and you've only had one income source your entire life, and you've just kept that all in cash or just in a low yield savings account, you may not be in as strong a position as you could have been if you'd invested in perhaps other businesses, real estate, dividend stocks, to be able to make your wealth create more wealth for you in a passive way. So whilst that's creating wealth, you can be doing your main job or creating even more side hustles to increase your wealth. And it's that domino effect of getting your money to work for you, and that compound effect. And the final point is work to learn, which very much fits into the first point, where at the end of the day, if you work primarily for a paycheck, at some point you will burn out. However, if you work to learn, not only will you minimise your risk of burning out, but also you're going to create more money. If you work to learn, you're going to be constantly improving your skill set and learning new ways to invest and increase your money. Now, I think particularly in today's age, and Robert even touched on this in his book, and this book came out before the internet was what it was today, is that you've got so much more opportunity to expand your knowledge and your skill base because of the internet. That's not just necessarily technological based skills. You can go onto YouTube and learn how to play the guitar for free. Obviously you'll need to invest in the equipment to do that, but in terms of those actual lessons, it's free. And in terms of finances, you can learn that for free. You can learn anything for free these days. So it's a really unlimited market in terms of how you can expand. So in terms of the length of Rich Dad Poor Dad, it's around 350 pages. Now, as you can see, it's not an A4 book, so it is a very quick read. I read this in about 3 or 4 moderately long sessions. So if you're someone who likes to sit down for a few hours and read a book, you could probably get this done in a couple of sittings. So in terms of getting this information, digesting it, it is a very quick read. There probably is a bit of filler in here. Some of the anecdotes are a bit longer than they need to be, and there is a lot of repeated information and graphs. However, it's pretty quick to read. So in terms of my actual thoughts on this book, I think there's a lot of good stuff, and I think there's a couple of negatives with this book. So the main good thing about this book is that the concepts to generate wealth are sound. They make sense. So it's all about investing in assets and not liabilities, and this is going to be relevant 23 years ago when this was written. It's going to be relevant today, and it's going to be relevant in another 20 years as well. And the stories, particularly in the first half of the book, are absolutely fantastic, and I don't know how true they are. I know that he did have 2 father figures, but in terms of these actual examples, I'm not sure. But in terms of actually getting the point across and showing you practical working examples of the theory and process, they absolutely work, and it's definitely the best way to be able to learn this sort of thing. And the third one is that it's an incredibly positive book. Granted, he's pretty scathing of people who don't share his mindset. He's quite insulting to them, actually. But in terms of following his method, he's incredibly supportive of it. He is a dreamer. He dreams of a society where everyone is able to generate wealth, provided they buy his book, is how I get the feeling. But yeah, it does have a feeling of the American dream, this book. And whilst it doesn't give you a massive amount of detail in terms of generating wealth from a primary income, in terms of building wealth generally, once you have that money, it is pretty good. And that brings me on to some of the negatives, is that it's not that specific. So in terms of building your income, he tells you about all the different jobs he worked. So all the different jobs he worked in terms of building his skill base and to learn, which is great, another great working example. However, in terms of specifics, it's not quite there. And again, like I touched on for the tax advice, it's outdated at this point, to be honest. So you're gonna have to research this as well, particularly when it comes to tax advice. But it's like everything, you shouldn't just watch one video on the internet or read one book and decide your entire life, personal finance and investing philosophy off just this. Read tons of these books, watch every YouTube video you can see, and then reflect on them. What do you agree with, what do you not agree with? And at the end of the day, just because a lot of people read and like this book, and I recommend it, doesn't mean that you should follow it at all. You've got to do what you feel comfortable with. Saying that, I would recommend reading this book. I think particularly if you don't have any sort of foundings in personal finance, if you've never really watched any of the YouTube channels or read any of the other personal finance books, this is a great jumping off point, because a lot of the books are based off this. And whilst the principles in this book probably don't elaborate enough, in my opinion, it is the perfect starting point. It's easy to get into, it's a really fun read. The first half almost reads more like a fiction, purely because of how well it's written and how entertaining it is. And it really clearly illustrates someone who was born with very little, who was judged because of the wealth of his family, who didn't have the best role models in his immediate family to be able to change his situation, but someone who looked outside of his biological family and found influences and role models who helped him change his life. And now he's helping to do that through this book, and he's done very well for himself, not only as an entrepreneur but also as an author as well. Okay guys, so that's it for this video. So absolutely recommend buying this book or checking it out. If you don't want to buy it, you can just watch a synopsis on YouTube. It's completely free. You can learn what you need to from this book in about 20 minutes. However, I would recommend buying it. He's a multi-millionaire, but I still believe in supporting people when they've created good content. And also, you will get more from reading this book than just seeing a synopsis. It's a bit like reading the synopsis of a film on Wikipedia. It's not quite the same seeing it in person. You get a lot more from it. So I definitely recommend this. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you're new to the channel, please remember to subscribe. please smash that like button and turn that notification bell on so that you see uploads before anybody else. And without further ado, I'll catch you in the next one.